Hello, and welcome back to another episode of 8-Bit Monsters Monster Deconstruction for D&D 5th Edition. On today's episode, we're going to take a trip back to the Yawning Portal and take a look at the Thorn Slinger. The Thorn Slinger can be found on page 246 of Tales from the Yawning Portal. The Thorn Slinger is a CR 1/2 monster worth 100 XP, and we can start looking at this for encounter building from Xanathar's Guide to Everything. Now, as a group monster, you can use this against 3 players at first level. After that, you really can't use it anymore as a group monster for your players because it's such a low CR rating. And with that, we can transition into the solo encounters. And we can pit 1 player to 1 Thorn Slinger at 2nd and 3rd level. After that, we can move into the swarm monsters. And at 4th level and up, we can then start using a bunch of these Thorn Slingers against our players at, whatever we have here on the charts. Although once you get past level 10 for your players, you're probably better off turning the Thorn Slinger into a minion monster and applying only 1 hit point to it. That way you can really swarm your players, but making them feel like a bunch of superheroes because they'll be able to one-shot these plants and take them out of the battle. Sure, you could use corpse flowers to keep the plant theme going. Sounds like we have the works of a good adventure going here for an overrun greenhouse or something. Thanks, Troll. We'll make sure to put your name in the credits. And lastly, we'll be skipping the epic encounters because the Thorn Slinger is just not high enough for a CR rating to be considered an epic encounter monster. Now with that out of the way, let's move into the TLDW. For our Thorn Slinger, we're going to find that our DCR is actually a 1/8, its OCR is a 1, its FCR is 1/2, which is great because that's the printed CR value, a 1/2. And because we have everything we need here, let's move into the skills and traits. In the skills and traits section, our Thorn Slinger has a proficiency bonus of +2 because of its low CR rating. And because the only other item it has in the skills section is a couple of condition immunities, we're going to skip over this and move right into the traits. Now, our Thorn Slinger has 2 traits to take a look at here. The first one is Adhesive Blossom. Now, the interesting thing about Adhesive Blossom is that anytime a player or other monster touches the Thorn Slinger, it gets grappled by it, giving this effective +1 AC bonus. Oh yeah! I almost forgot that part, but you reminded me. I really appreciate the help there, and this could be counteracted with an enlarge or polymorph spell. Great catch, Troll! On top of that, the creature also gets disadvantage for trying to escape the Adhesive Blossom, and can then start doing damage to the grappled target for some acid damage, which we'll take a look at in the OCR section. So, the Adhesive Blossom is got 2 effects going on here. It's going to get the effective +1 AC bonus for the grapple, as well as adding +3.5 DPR, which again we'll look at later on. The next trait to look at, and the last one, is False Appearance. Now, we've seen this before in a couple other of the monsters, similar to the Grey Ooze and maybe a couple others. As we saw before, the False Appearance trait will give no effect to our monster, and we can just move on from there. Next, we'll take a look at the DCR section. Now, our Thorn Slinger has an actual hit point rating of 32, which comes from 5d10 hit dice plus 5 from the Constitution bonus. And that average 32 hit points will rate this Thorn Slinger at a DCR of 1/8. And that's pretty low for hit points, although it is on the high end for its hit point rating. And since there's nothing affecting the Thorn Slinger's hit points, this will be the effective hit point rating of 32. So when we look at our chart later, we can just jump right into the DCR of 1/8. Now for its armor class rating, we'll see that the Thorn Slinger has an actual AC of 11, which comes from its +1 dexterity bonus. But because of the Adhesive Blossom and the fact that it can grapple creatures, it's going to get that +1 effective bonus, moving this from an 11 to a 12. And now that we have the effective AC bonus, let's take a look at the actual ratings on the chart. So we look at the DCR of 1/8 that we found from 32 hit points, and when we look at the chart for its expected AC bonus, we'll see that it's expected to have an AC of 13. Now this is compared to the effective AC of 12, which is -1 under the expected, meaning there will be no shift to the DCR at all, and our Thorn Slinger has a DCR of 1/8. And now that our DCR is found, let's shift into the OCR section. Okay, so our Thorn Slinger has thorns as part of its attack, and the nice thing is that this can be used as a melee or ranged attack. Yeah, but you must have been pretty close, Troll, because the range on these thorns isn't very far. It's only about 30 feet, so you must have been running through a patch of these things or something. Anyways. And these thorns deal on average 8 points of damage, coming from 2d6 plus 1 piercing damage. And on top of that, if a target is grappled by the adhesive blossom, we'll also be getting an additional plus 3.5 acid damage coming from 1d6. And when we total that all together to get the average damage, we'll find that our Thorn Slinger is dealing 11.5 damage, and this will be considered an OCR of 1. Now looking at its attack bonus, we'll see that the Thorn Slinger has an actual attack bonus of plus 3. Now we could take into consideration the DC check of the acid damage coming from the adhesive blossom, but I won't take that into consideration here because the Thorn Slinger is getting more damage from the thorns than the acid damage of the adhesive blossom. So I'm only going to apply the attack bonus here rather than the DC because the damage from the thorns is higher. And because there's nothing else affecting the attack bonus of the Thorn Slinger, the plus 3 will also be the effective attack bonus rating here. Now looking at our chart and finding the OCR 1 range, the OCR is expected to have an attack bonus of plus 3. Comparing it to the effective attack bonus, this is exactly the same and there's no difference here, meaning there's going to be no shift again. So our Thorn Slinger has an OCR of 1. And now that we have our OCR and our DCR found out, let's move into the FCR calculations. So our Thorn Slinger only has the one way to deal damage, besides its grapple, which we apply to the attacks anyways. And the Thorn Slinger will have a DCR of 1/8, plus the OCR of 1, which will equal 1.125, and when we average that out, we'll have a total of 0.5625. And when we round that to the closest CR rating, we're going to drop that down to a CR 1/2. So technically, our Thorn Slinger is actually a little stronger than a typical CR 1/2, but because of the low hit point rating and the fact that this plant can die pretty quickly, this is why it's considered a CR 1/2. Okay, cool. Our FCR is set. Let's take a look at some notes here. My first note is about Adhesive Blossom. And the question here is, when does the Adhesive Blossom actually stick to the target? I'm thinking because it suggests that melee attacks touch players or other targets. This could also be considered a grapple effect because it says when a target touches the Thorn Slinger, this is also the Thorn Slinger touching something else. So in essence, the Adhesive Blossoms will stick to the target when it makes an attack. On top of that, there's also the disadvantage coming from trying to escape. And even though the Thorn Blossom has a lower DC rating of 11 to escape its vines and whatnot, this will make it a little harder for any target wrapped up in the Adhesive Blossoms to get out. So this is why I added the damage into the Thorn Slinger's OCR. Note number 2 is the false appearance. This is allowing the Thorn Slinger to use its ranged attacks to get a little bit more damage in before the attacks become melee. And the nice thing about this is that, well, the Thorn Slinger can sit there and look like a regular bush of thorns. And then once it's decided, okay, this is a good range, it can start spitting thorns at its targets to attract it closer and do whatever it needs to do. Finally, note number 3, my favorite section of the hit point hit dice absolute maximum. Here we can raise the hit points to 45 for our Thorn Slinger, which comes from 7d10 plus 7. And this is going to be the maximum amount of hit points you can actually give this Thorn Slinger. This will raise the DCR from a 1/8 to a 1/4. and we'll see that a DCR of 1/4 plus an OCR of 1 will equal 1.25, and when we average that out, we'll get 0.625. And again, because of math rules and rounding to the closest CR rating, this will still drop us down to a CR of 1/2. Even though technically in normal math rules, a 6 should round up to 1, because we're comparing it to 0.5 and 1.0, the 0.625 will actually bring it down to a 0.5, which will result in the CR 1/2. Now that we have the notes taken care of, let's jump into the CR review. So, is our Thorn Slinger a balanced monster? Yes, technically it is a balanced monster, and if we look at our chart here, we'll see that even though the DCR is incredibly low at a 0.125 compared to the OCR of 1, this does actually balance out to a CR 1/2 monster. It's just a very typical case of the monster having crazy high damage versus crazy low defenses to give us this middle range. It's just the dismal DCR rating that gets to me, troll. Yeah, I understand it's a plant, but it's also a magical world, so it could have iron leaves or something. I don't know. Why do these monsters always need a lower DCR rating? It just doesn't make any sense to me. Alright, let's carry on. And even though it is technically a middle range, and it is the printed value of a CR 1/2, there is that little bit of wiggle room, as you'll see by the tiny bar over the green graph for the FCR, that technically this is actually a little higher than the printed value, but because D&D likes to have set numbers, we don't go through all these and say, okay, well I've got a CR 9/16 and a CR 1/2 monster and a CR 22.125 monster. The rounder numbers are nicer to look at. So, just like all of the other monsters we've looked at, with the exception of the werewolf, this is very typical for D&D, where our OCR is extremely high and our DCR is extremely low. And if you don't remember the werewolf, you can take a look at the video here. Thank you for joining us this week as we deconstructed the Thorn Slinger from D&D 5th edition. Join us again next week as we deconstruct another monster from D&D 5th edition and break it down into its barest parts to see what is going on with these monsters. If you've been enjoying these videos, I would really appreciate it if you would share these videos with your friends, your D&D groups. Shoot, if you play Pathfinder or Call of Cthulhu or any other TTRPG, consider sharing it with them. I would really appreciate it, and it could help the channel grow. Until next time, when we deconstruct another monster from D&D 5th edition, take care everyone, and I'll see you next time.